This video is brought to you by Brilliant. Pick up a new skill or just learn more about things like science, math, engineering, computer science, and so much more thanks to Brilliant's accessible and interactive courses. Try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for 30 days and get 20% off an annual subscription by visiting brilliant.org/skillup. Click the link below to get started or stick around to the end of the video to learn more. Star Wars Outlaws. So this one's really getting the shit kicked out of it online, isn't it? So all this started when Ubisoft first revealed pricing and pre-order information about this one. It's standard Ubisoft bullshit, overpriced deluxe editions, paid early access, plus content in the main game, paywalled behind pre-purchasing the season pass. So a lot of negative press came from that. Then there was the hands-on beat at Summer Games Fest. It was the first time media and content creators got a chance to play it. By and large, the impressions were positive. No one said it was incredible, but most people, myself included, said that this was a good time, helped in large part by how immersive it felt to be walking around bustling streets surrounded by gambling and shady characters and stormtroopers shaking down honest merchants, etc. The gameplay wasn't setting the world on fire, but the vibes were there, and that was enough to carry it for most people, including myself. Not so for Eurogamer, who wrote of the preview build, quote, "After a worryingly dated hands-on with Star Wars Outlaws, Ubisoft's galactic open world feels less exciting than expected. Outlaws' early gameplay feels positively ancient, not only mechanically but in execution, in its near total lack of character, flair, invention, detail, or style. In trying to describe it, the closest comparison I can draw is with Uncharted Golden Abyss, which launched in 2011 on the PS Vita," end quote. Now the thing is, that person isn't wrong, because mechanically, this is a very straightforward game that is comprised of some very basic gameplay loops. It's some stealthing against brain-dead enemies, it's some very simple cover shooting combat, and it's some traversal, which honestly does feel a lot like an Uncharted game. We got to see more of this stuff during a recent IGN first. They showed 10 minutes of exclusive gameplay. It was not well received. The like ratio on that video has been completely pummeled. Clips of it have been going viral all across social media. This clip in particular being used to ridicule just how simple the shooting combat is.
They're headed for us. Oh, got the tooth. I should get out of here.
So again, I don't think anyone can argue with the fact that this is pretty basic, and I said the same thing when I first previewed the game a few months back. I was like, for me, this is more about the feeling of being in a Star Wars adventure rather than innovative gameplay. I likened it to Jedi Fallen Order and Survivor, which were pretty straightforward Souls-light melee action games, but they really nailed a take on Star Wars that felt authentic. So all this setup is to understand the narrative around this one, and all of this sat front of mind for me as I played through a 4-hour-long preview build 2 weeks ago at Ubisoft's HQ in Sydney. I was thinking about it a lot, and I do not disagree with any of the complaints about the core gameplay here. I do think this is mechanically very simple, and at times a little too simple, a little too narrow in terms of the agency it affords you. It can feel very on rails in a way that is frustrating. The stealth model is pretty played out and the combat is little to write home about. The outer space ship combat stuff is not good, I think. It feels more like a minigame than an actual core component of the experience, but we'll talk more about that later. So I definitely have complaints about how this plays, for sure, but I will also tell you that I genuinely had a good time playing for 4 hours because I really did feel kind of spirited away as I explored new planets, met new characters, uncovered hidden side quests, made decisions about who to side with or betray. As a Star Wars adventure, I was into this to the point where it helped me look past those obvious gameplay shortcomings. But it's not going to be the same for everyone, and I do predict a mixed reception to this. If you're a Star Wars fan and you're looking for some good old-fashioned Star Wars and you want to be immersed in that galaxy far, far away, like almost no other game before has been able to do, then I think you will get a kick out of this. But if you're looking for something deeply playable, I suspect this will not be it. Ubisoft games often live in their systemic open-world gameplay formula, but ironically enough, Star Wars Outlaws seems to be a bit of an inverse of that, resting far more on its character's story and setting to carry the day. Admitting my own personal bias as a Star Wars fan, I'm into this, because no Star Wars game I've played other than maybe Star Wars The Old Republic has delivered that feeling of immersion that I'm feeling here. But I also think there's plenty that you could nitpick or criticize about the playable aspects of Star Wars Outlaws, and all those criticisms would be totally fair.
Here you live and die by your reputation.
Alright, let's be clear about what I experienced and how I experienced it. It was a 4-hour-long hands-on session at Ubisoft's office. I was playing on a 4090 PC at 4K resolution, however the footage was captured in 1080p. What you are seeing here is mostly my own recorded gameplay with some extra B-roll spliced in. I pleaded with Ubisoft to let me record in 4K, but for whatever reason they declined, saying it had to be 1080. I guess they want their games to look worse when they are publicly previewing them. Ridiculous. But anyway, I played with controller, which is why you'll absolutely see some potato aim here, but there was also the option to do keyboard and mouse as well. I just prefer to play third-person games with the controller, even if it means my shooting accuracy drops to like 15%. The demo is effectively split into 3 parts. Most of it was spent on a planet called Toshara, where I was focused on getting my ship space-worthy again after some sort of incident left me stranded in need of repairs. The second section was some time spent in outer space, a bit of exploration and combat there. The third section was on Kijimi, which was similar to what I played back at the Summer Games Fest, albeit expanded here. The demo began with a combat tutorial introducing me to a slowdown mechanic that we have seen in a few games now. After that, it was time for an in-engine cutscene, and full warning, when it comes to facial animations, this is very, very not good.
I don't need help. I'm getting out of here.
How? You're an off-worlder, and this ship of yours isn't gonna fly anytime soon. But lucky for you, I'm a mechanic.
How many credits are we talking?
I mean, a few, mostly for parts. But good news, Toshara is a great place for someone with your skills. There's a Pike underboss named Gorak. Talk to him.
And he'll give me work. Got it.
Okay, so like I said, that was not good at all. Ubisoft as a publisher has always really struggled with this. Even most recently with Assassin's Creed Mirage, facial animations were abysmal. They're actually worse here somehow, and I was honestly stunned at how bad this was. They are slightly better during the pre-rendered cutscenes. Take a look at one of those.
I don't know you.
What? You never make new friends?
I have enough friends.
Yeah, but you don't have to pay me to hang out with you.
So that's better, but it's still not great, and it does hold this game back because of what I said in the intro. More so than most other Ubisoft games, this one is really leaning into characters and story, but your willing suspension of disbelief is definitely interrupted when you are looking at these weird, waxy faces and all the post-processing effects swirling around to make this look passable. It's a good thing then that the voice acting, characterization, and storylines are actually pretty well done. You play as Kay Vess, and she's already an experienced scoundrel, but she's a newcomer on basically every planet she visits, so she has to worm her way into the criminal cartels to get by and survive. The dialogue feels authentic in a way that the facial stuff just doesn't. This is a story about the grimy underworld of the Star Wars universe, and while it's still very PG rated, it was doing enough to pull me in and get me invested in where all this was headed.
You want to survive? Know the players. Look there. The Pikes have the most say, thanks to Gorak. Cutthroat, political. They pay up to play favorites with the Empire. Then, Crimson Dawn. Hungry for Gorak's kingdom. Crafty, sneaky. Unlike the Hutts. With them, what you see is what you get.
While this is a street-level story, so to speak, there was one cutscene that hinted at a bigger, more sprawling storyline connecting you to the Empire. We're not allowed to show that one here. It's literally the one cutscene that Ubisoft said we could not show from this preview slice, and it's a good one. As much as I'm interested to see what sort of scrapes Kay gets herself into when working against or with a bunch of shady cartel characters, I'm equally interested to see where the bigger storyline goes, since the little I saw of it definitely piqued my curiosity. So that's the story. Let's get back to what it's like to play this. After that very weird looking cutscene outside my ship, my mechanic buddy tells me to hop on a speeder and get to the local town so I can begin the quest for spare parts. The speeder is fine, it hasn't got much of a feel to it, it kind of just goes. It does control well and it has a handbrake turn, but it doesn't have much in the way of handling physics that make it fun to drive, like a Destiny Sparrow for example. That one's an acquired taste in terms of handling profile, but it's ultimately satisfying to drive that thing and go off big jumps and swing your ass around to navigate a corner. The speeder here in Outlaws just doesn't deliver the same satisfying feedback, but as I said, it gets the job done. It's also pretty unforgiving in terms of geometry. Fail to pay attention for even a second, and yeah, it doesn't go very well for you. Wasn't long until I ran into trouble out there on the plains. Here's a look at some of the speeder combat and what that's like. you can see, it's pretty janky. Enemies don't really seem to know what to do if you ram them. The whole thing feels kind of scripted rather than being kind of real and organic. When it was over, I wanted to ride on the enemy speeder, but sadly the game wouldn't let me do that, which was quite disappointing. I did spend plenty of time on the speeder throughout the course of my demo. Mostly it was just a tool to get from A to B, but there was one little bit of side content, which was a race, which was, yeah, simple, but it was relatively fun. So look, the speeder is a mount. You call it with the press of a button. It's no more or no less interesting than like Roach from The Witcher, and I do wish that Massive had been able to figure out how to make this thing handle a little better or give us some more interesting things to do with it, but hey, maybe that comes later. So I ride the speeder into the outskirts of town, hop off, and there Nix, my little sidekick buddy, tells me that he's found something. This is where I can do a brief little bit of climbing. Again, a very big part of Star Wars Outlaws, not so much in this demo, but certainly in the slice I played earlier this year. At the end of it, I get a nice little treasure thing which I can bring to a vendor in the market for some cosmetics. Okay, so here's where it starts to get cool. I get to the main part of town and there's an Imperial security checkpoint. Not only does it look really nice, but it also just feels cool to be going through an Imperial security checkpoint. Take a look.
Let me see some identification.
Oh, yeah, sure.
You're Torrin Valerio Nup?
That's me. Mm-hmm.
All right, move along.
At this point, we're now in this dodgy-looking town, which is clearly another hive of scum and villainy. Stormtroopers are asking to see people's papers. People are being thrown out onto the street because they owe money they can't pay. You can bet on those creepy goat horse things from The Last Jedi. Interestingly, at one point, I picked up a little data pad that had a note on it that read that the race was actually rigged and that the heaviest horse would win. I went back to the betting house, put as much as I could on the heaviest horse, and sure enough, winner, winner, chicken dinner. It was a small thing, but it was cool. Something that rewarded me for actually reading that stuff, and it also felt very in keeping with the setting to be profiting from a fixed horse race.
I was right.
During the reveal cycle for Star Wars Outlaws, Ubisoft claimed that this was the first ever truly open world Star Wars game, to which everyone replied, what about Jedi Survivor? That was open world, right? And that's true, it was. Basically, it was more hub-based than truly open world, but so is Star Wars Outlaws. This is a game comprised of a certain number of planets, aka hubs. They each have a central town and a big surrounding area where you can explore. Structurally, it isn't too different from what Jedi Survivor was doing. The big difference between those two games and their open worlds is that Jedi Survivor often had you exploring uninhabited worlds or very sparsely inhabited places, but here in Star Wars Outlaws, planets are very, very inhabited. When you're cruising the open world on your speeder, you'll see other civilians just riding around on their speeders. When you're in town, it's teeming with people and aliens and hoodlums and Imperial officers. It feels incredibly dense and alive, and yeah, just that word, immersive. I love just walking around this town, hearing all the audio barks, meeting the vendors, and more than anything else, just soaking up the visuals because they look really nice. Massive's level designers have always been excellent, and I think they've done some great work here in designing spaces that truly look the part with no attention to detail spared. So at this point, I get a mission to infiltrate an area of the city controlled by a hostile cartel, and it's here that the wheels start to fall off a little bit again. So the basic premise is that I can't get spotted. If I do, not many tools at my disposal to be able to distract enemies or use my surroundings to my advantage. In fact, at one point I discover a vent and I'm like, oh yeah, nice, I can surely use this to hide or whatever. Nope, it just wouldn't let me get in without telling me why. Later on, I learned that I actually need to open up the other side of the vent first before being able to crawl into this end, which is obviously ridiculous because how would I have known that? The fact that I tried to crawl into this space at all meant that I eventually got caught because I had nowhere else to go. It was very frustrating. So that section is a little frustrating because you're not allowed to use weapons and it's ultimately conditioning you to approach stealth with a very lock and key kind of mindset where there's one golden path forward and a lot of waiting around while you wait for enemies to patrol. Eventually though, you enter a new area where you're able to both stealth and use your weapons. You can mark targets with a little set of binoculars, classic Ubisoft. Was more than a little surprised to drop down though and see Assassin's Creed style tall grass in a Star Wars spaceport. At this point, I was like, come on, Ubisoft, what are we doing here? Like, for real, is this really what we're doing? Space grass? I don't know, man, it's just... Anyway, the stealth stuff is exactly what you experience in dozens of other Ubisoft games before, only now it's in a Star Wars land instead of ancient Greece or slightly remixed Cuba. Cynicism aside, this section was actually pretty fun. I did stealth for a bit until I got spotted, the alarm blew, and then it was on like Donkey Kong. Again, some simple cover shooting, but it worked. I was having a good time being a cheeky scoundrel on a heist mission. When I got to my objective, I learned something I shouldn't have, and then it was time to escape. A bit of traversal, a few fisticuffs, and I'm back out in the city ready to hand in what I found. In so doing, I'm presented with a choice. The thing that I learned that I shouldn't have, I can either share that with my contact here, or I can hold on to it for someone else, and doing so will increase or decrease my standing with the various factions operating on this planet. Not only does that award me new pathways in the missions I'm completing, but it also affects which vendors will sell to me at a discount. It affects the cosmetics I can unlock, and at very low standing with certain factions, they'll actually send bounty hunters after me. During my playthrough, I sided with the Pike faction, and later on when stormtroopers were trying to shake down a merchant, I was able to lean on that affiliation to help my man out.
You sure you want to stick your nose into this, kid?
Bet the Pikes wouldn't like finding out you're shaking down traitors on their turf.
What are you gonna do? Tell them?
No, I actually have Gorek's comms. Here, I'll show you. It's PT-969, right?
You know what? Forget it. This isn't worth my time.
So at this point I was kind of just free to roll around and do whatever I liked, and so that's what I did. I checked out all the merchants in town, I picked up some side quests that sent me into the open world, I hassled an Imperial checkpoint on the outskirts of town, I rode around on my speeder for a bit, I infiltrated an enemy compound to steal something, I did that speeder race, unlocked an upgrade for my blaster, changed my outfit. It was honestly pretty fun. It was standard open world fodder, but it was nice to be bumping into Imperials and gangsters and helping out civilians where I could. But there was always some jank, and I want to be super clear about that. I did notice enemies bugging out on geometry, I did notice some enemy AI get caught in the alert phase when I was stealthing near them and they just stayed in it permanently. At one point I chanced upon a little civilian outpost and the Empire are making trouble for them, so I try to sweet talk my way out of it, but I'm given no warning about what might happen if things don't go my way, and so then this happens.
Yeah? Well, do you know that this is private property? I gave them permission for them to fish here.
You really expect me to believe that?
Worth a shot.
She's injured! Get her! Suspect neutralized.
See what I mean? That's not cool. That's not a bug, that's just badly telegraphed dialogue outcomes, and that really pulls you out of this experience. And jankiness is definitely a part of the Star Wars Outlaws experience, and so I don't want to obscure that from you. I'm not going to downplay it at all, because I do think that these little frustrations can and will pile up for some people, and that despite their best efforts to love this, there are just going to be too many little cracks in the pavement that they're going to trip over. I think the spaceship stuff is a good example of that. I got a small taste of this during the Summer Games Fest build, and I didn't really like it. It just wasn't doing much for me. I spent a lot more time with it here in this build, and now I like it even less. Earlier I said that this feels like a minigame, and that really is the best way to describe it. It's extremely simplified flight and combat mechanics. It's picking up space junk for some reason by just flying near it and holding a button. It's getting jumped by random pirates who don't put up much of a fight. At one point I found a vessel in distress being attacked, so I'm like, okay, sure, sounds good, let's do it. I clear out all the enemies and I'm like, cool, great job, well done me. Then another wave comes in and I've got to do the exact same thing all over again. I really groaned when that happened because it had already felt like such a slog to get that first wave down. I did not want to do another wave. It was an activity that took about 7 minutes, but it felt like 30. Yeah, I don't like the space stuff. I really hope it remains highly optional, because if we're forced to do a lot of it, then I can see it being a big problem.
You got another job for me? Guess this is life for us now, huh, Max?
Tell me why I shouldn't have you thrown out of here.
So look, I know how this preview sounds. I've complained about facial animations, generic stealth, traversal, and combat. I've complained about some sections feeling too linear, some bugs and some jank, and I don't like the flight stuff at all. So why then am I not just writing this off altogether? Well, I come back to what I said about my response to all of this. The parts of this that were working well enough for me that I was still on board. A huge part of it is the fact that this is the first game since Shadow of the Empire on the Nintendo 64 that lets me live out this kind of scoundrel fantasy. Part of it is the visuals and the setting, which look fantastic. except for the facial animations, of course, we covered that. Part of it is to do with the voice and characterization work, which I was really quite into, and part of it with the storylines, which I did become invested in. I'm also just partial to a bit of generic open world Ubi fodder sometimes. I really am. I love me some Far Cry. I always enjoyed the first 20 or so hours of an Assassin's Creed game. I loved Immortal Phoenix Rising, and of course, I love The Division. Contrary to popular belief, I am not anti-Ubisoft's formula. I just think it wears out its welcome after that 20-hour mark, and that their portfolio as a whole is too focused on quantity over quality, on what's safe rather than on what's innovative. But there are some interesting ideas here in Outlaws. Progression, for example, is my favorite. Instead of your typical progression tree with nodes or whatever, you actually have to track down experts, many of them hidden behind side content, and when you do manage to track them down, they'll teach you what they know by giving you a number of challenges to complete that unlock a new proficiency. I'm into that. That sounds like way more fun than just clicking on nodes after I reach level 177. Looking at you, AC Valhalla. I will say though that this extended preview slice did leave me less enthusiastic about Outlaws than did the initial slice that I played. That was a very narrow slice, very curated, and now having seen more of the game, I got to see more of its rough edges. And sure, we're a month from launch, but in game dev time, that's basically nothing. 99% of what I saw will no doubt make its way into the final release, and what I saw was enough to make me go, okay, I like this, but I can see why a lot of people are not going to like it, especially if they are not into Star Wars. Austin edited this video, and as he was editing it, he said to me that this reminds him a lot of the other licensed Ubi massive game that released just last year. Talking, of course, about that Avatar game. That was a very simple game that banked a lot on its setting. If you were into Avatar, you probably liked it. If you didn't give a shit about Avatar, you probably didn't. As a Star Wars fan who's been waiting for this type of game for a long time, I have no qualms telling you that I had plenty of fun with this despite its lack of ambition and its many issues. You will obviously decide for yourself how much all of that matters to you, so I hope this preview has been helpful on that front. Star Wars Outlaws launches on August 30th for PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. I'll be at Gamescom around that time, but I will try to squeeze in a full review at or near launch. Have you guys ever heard of Brilliant before? Here's how it works. It's a platform that just teaches you interesting things, be they foundational mathematical concepts, how GPS works, or even how to code. Brilliant provide really accessible, really interactive ways to learn about things like science, mathematics, engineering, computer science, and so much more. They have courses big and small, simple and in-depth, all of them illuminating something that seemed at first impenetrable, but you really just needed someone to explain it to you properly, or you needed to learn by doing, which is another thing that Brilliant excels at, since courses almost always contain some interactive element that lets you apply and test your learning on the spot. This stuff isn't just interesting, it's also useful. If you work in data programming, then the stuff you learn here can help you be better at your job. And just having a sharper, more curious mind is always going to hold you in good stead no matter what you're doing. I actually just finished a course on quantum mechanics, something I became interested in after playing Outer Wilds. That is not a joke, by the way. It's an impossibly complicated topic, but Brilliant really excels at breaking it down into simple concepts that my non-scientist brain can actually understand. And so I learned a lot and I really enjoyed it whilst doing it. One thing I really like is that Brilliant kind of gamifies your learning, breaking your progress down into manageable chunks, giving you experience points and achievements for completing courses, and gradually upping the complexity as you get more proficient in a topic. Best of all, they have a mobile app allowing you to log in and start learning whenever you've got a spare 5 or 10 minutes. So you could boot up a mobile game, and I absolutely do, but now I also boot up Brilliant from time to time. You can try Brilliant for free for 30 days, absolutely no cost, but if you do want to get an annual subscription, you'll get a 20% discount on it when you visit brilliant.org/skillup. Start learning for free for 30 days and get 20% off your annual subscription over at brilliant.org/skillup. Thanks Brilliant for sponsoring the video, and thank you for watching it.